Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Eric Smith, and I'll be talking about some RFID attacks. If I can even see you guys. You guys ever play with RFID? Anybody? Somebody? Know something about it? Awesome. All right, so the talk kind of goes through a series of kind of refresher what's been going, and specific to what we're talking about here is RFID as it relates to access control for buildings. So not your bus passes, not your MyFair cards, not your ski resort lift passes, things like that. Specifically, two types of technology that we'll dive into a bit. One of them has been around for a long time. A lot of researchers have talked about them, which is the low-frequency Prox Card 2s, and newer technologies have moved to a encrypted format, and that's what we're going to focus on in the latter part of the talk. And then after that, we'll talk about some advanced attacks you can do against those kinds of systems, as well as some mitigation around those things. So a little bit about a company that I own and I work for. It's LARES Consulting. We've been around now for about 8 years. We've done a decent amount of stuff in the industry, not just work-related, but also things related to improving the community. One of the things we put together that we're proud of, along with Dave actually, is something called peeps. So we started writing a standard for how to conduct security assessments, specifically around pen testing. There was really no standards about it prior to what this created. So myself, along with about 400 other people in the community, got together and put together a standard around pen testing. Along with that, there's been some other things about the company itself. And one of the things that you guys may have heard of is a little TV show they made about us called Tiger Team. We've presented at a number of conferences around the world. I personally have presented here at DakotaCon a few times, as well as performed on the red team for CCDC here. A little bit about myself. Obviously, you can tell I'm not serious. I don't have the suit picture. That was actually a boat race we did last year when it was raining its ass off. But some of the services that I specialize in is penetration testing, risk assessment, social engineering, physical security, and blended threat types of attacks. So this obviously is one type of attack you can do when you're looking at things like red team, physical security, and blended threats. So I'm fortunate enough to be able to do what I like to do. If you're not, somebody made a quote a long time ago that said, if you're getting up and you're working every day and you're not happy, then it's work. It's not a career. So I personally have been lucky enough to get up every day and be happy with what I do and the company that I've helped build and work for, and it's more of a hobby than a job. So again, what we're talking about here is one aspect of red team testing. It's obviously got a long definition of what red team testing is. It originated in the military, and you guys can read that long definition if you want to. But the analogy that we like to use around red team testing is it simulates a fight. If you put someone in the ring and they are actually in the middle of a fight, they're going to know how to defend. They can train all day in the gym, they can spar, they can box, they can perform all these different types of martial arts. But until you're actually in a fight, you don't know how you're going to stand up in a fight. So the whole point of red team testing is to put an organization into an actual fight and see how well they defend against it, which is similar to what we do for CCDC, right? So there's a number of reasons to conduct it. Obviously, one is to simulate what could happen in a real attack. What's the impact to the brand? What's the impact to the bottom line of the company? But also, it's essentially a full DR test for your InfoSec program. How well is your program going to hold up to a number of different types of attacks, whether it's physical, social, electronic, or a blend of those? And red team testing, like I hinted at already, is a collaboration of those different aspects. So you may use an electronic attack to gain access to an organization. Once you've gained access, then you might use that to then get physical access. So there's some things I'll talk about in this talk where we can leverage things like penetration testing from the outside, gain access to a badge system, learn details about what's in that badge system, to then create a badge and then show up on site and badge into a building. And all that started from an external threat. So there's a number of techniques when you speak of red team testing and gain access to a facility. Conventional attacks are everything from tailgating into a building via social engineering, if you want to call it that, all the way down to lock picking and shimming and lock bypassing and doing things with elevators and all sorts of different types of direct attacks. But what we're specifically going to talk about today is just RFID. So there's two technologies that we're going to talk about today. One, and they both look similar, you know, the badges that you see people wearing on their hips all the time, around lanyards, things like that. You guys may have them here on campus for doing certain things. There's two types. There's low frequency, which runs at 125 kilohertz, and then there's also high frequency that runs at 13.56 megahertz. The read ranges on both of them vary slightly depending on what kind of reader that the card is presented to. So we'll dive into a little bit about the length of those and how some of those things work, but specifically, there's two types we're going to talk about today, low frequency being unencrypted, high frequency being the iCLASS technology, which is all encrypted. So here's the stink of it. This was a quote released a few years ago. I forgot the date on it. And it's from HID, which is the #1 vendor for all these different asset tags, these different types of cards and the technologies. And the quote was, the low frequency unencrypted cards are still used in about 80% of their customer space. The other 20% is using a mixture of these types of assets, some of them being the encrypted iCLASS, some of them being a third party that's not HID specific, but 80% of the companies out there that use access controls related to RFID HID cards are using the unencrypted form. So that's scary just in the statistic, but then you put it into perspective of who's actually using those kinds of cards, and this ties back to some of what Scott was just alluding to, is whenever you can put physical harm on someone or you can impact someone's life, that's usually much more of a risk than a business losing data, losing personal records, losing something that's just going to cost them a financial amount of money. And then sometimes it's small compared to how much they make, right? There's big debates going on right now about how much does a breach actually impact a company. Can companies survive a breach? And most companies can. Look at, you know, companies like TJ Maxx. They got breached years ago. They're still around doing great. Look at Target, their stocks didn't drop. You know, it was minimal. So when you put things into perspective like this, and you start looking at places that have these types of technologies, you're looking at, you know, SCADA plants, nuclear plants, hospitals, all these different places that you could cause physical harm, physical destruction to not only the people in that facility, but around the facility. Imagine getting into a nuclear plant and causing destruction there. And all those are using an unencrypted technology that you'll see how fast it is that you can do things with it. So how does a badge system work? I've got one here that, it's actually working now, it's awesome. All right, it wasn't working 5 minutes ago. It's all broke from flying on the plane. It's been on 3 trips now with me. But this is a badge system that I purchased from a company called Midpoint Security. And they assemble whatever badge technology you want to put in here. So this is actually a newer edge reader, a multi-class reader or a controller and a multi-class reader that supports both the low frequency and the high frequency, so unencrypted and encrypted. So it's a great way to simulate what you guys have or what a company has for their entire facility. They would have a reader on the outside of the building. You would walk up, badge in there. They would then have a controller somewhere buried in a wall, in a switch closet, wherever that controller may be. That controller then interfaces to a system on the back end that is the badge software that controls who has access to what. You know, XYZ user might have access just to first floor, but a privileged user might have access to a data center. The badge system itself holds all those different roles and access levels. So those interface with the badge system, and then you have things like you might see when you walk out of a facility, there's a button to push that opens the door. It's called force to exit. So this simulates you can have a force to exit. You also have a simulation here that most doors will have some kind of magnetic alarm. So if you break that beam, I'm not going to do it, it's loud. If I break that beam, that'll simulate the door was opened without that badge actually opening the door. So great way to demonstrate how a badge system works. But essentially, if you look at the diagram here, user walks up to a door, badges in, there's a field of read for the RFID. The reader itself powers the card. It then reads the information stored on the card, sends it back to the controller. Controller then converts that to what's called Wiegand. And on that side of the reader, everything's unencrypted. And then from there to the badge system, it determines if you have access to that particular reader that you're authenticating to. Make sense so far? So HID is, again, HID, in my opinion, the way I like to put it is they're a Microsoft without Apple. They own the market. There's no other company out there that even competes with what they do. There's small, little spin-ups that have occurred over the years. They have a small part of the market, but it's a fraction compared to what HID has. For years, they've been putting out more and more technologies, but predominantly the design of them, if you open up a card is there's an RFID chip inside of it, and there's an antenna that usually goes around the perimeter of the card. So if you were to open up one of these cards, you'd see one of these types of formats. They all kind of follow the same process. The read ranges are typically about the same. They're anywhere from 1 to 2 inches for these kinds of cards, or for these kinds of readers, and then you can get into what we'll look at here in a few, which are the big garage-style readers. So in the parking garages, airports, things like that, you'll see a reader that's usually 2 feet, 3 feet, something like that, big square. Those have a much wider read range, so you don't have to get out of your car and present the card directly up to the reader. You can be a foot or two away from it. So we'll talk about how you can leverage some of those things as well. So on the back end, I referenced something called Wiegand protocol. The Wiegand protocol is how the reader communicates to the access controller. There's essentially 2 wires. There's data 0 and data 1. And they send the Wiegand protocol back to the controller. And unencrypted, and you can decode those if you do certain types of attacks on the controller. And we'll talk about some of those later in the talk. So everything from the reader to the controller is an unencrypted protocol called Wiegand. So when you're thinking about what is required for you to authenticate and gain access to a particular door or an entry system, there's 3 things that gets looked at when you present your card, or your tag is what they call them, to a reader. They look at what's called a card type, 26-bit, 35-bit, 37-bit, whatever it might be. It also looks at what your facility code is. So you have a facility code assigned to that building. And it also looks at what your access card number, which is typically printed on the card. So really, facility code and access card number are the only 2 pieces of data I need to either forge a credential or present that authentication token to the reader to try and gain access to that doorway. Facility code and access card. The access card number is typically printed on the badge. So now think of username and password. If you were walking around with a tag on your chest, a name tag, and it had your username on it, you would consider that somewhat of a leak, right? Now I know what your username is. All I have to do is figure out your password. Well, facility code and access card number are really just 2 user IDs or 2 passwords. So if I can learn one off of walking up to someone and looking at their badge, someone posts pictures of them all the time online. If I'm in the badge system and I can pull some of that data out, now I have at least one of the 2 pieces required to authenticate. There's multi-factor that we can talk about later that enforces biometrics and PIN and things like that, and there's flaws in those too. But the basis of an authentication when you present a tag to a reader is a facility code and a card number. So they should be considered private because they're essentially your passwords. Whether it's unencrypted or encrypted, on the back end, it's still Wiegand unencrypted data. Those 2 pieces of information should be considered private. What we are finding when we are doing some of our research is people like to post things online, of course. People also like to buy extra cards from eBay when they run out of cards because they've hired more employees, they've lost cards, whatever. If you look here, and so when HID sells you extra cards, they sell them in a series. You'll buy a range of cards, and it might be 6,000 to 6,500. You might buy 500 cards. But then, cost cuts, budget cuts, whatever, you don't have as many employees as you thought you were going to, you might want to sell those cards. People then put those on eBay. So on eBay, they list right on the side of the box what my company code, facility code is, and the range of cards that they're selling. So think of it in terms of OSINT now, an Intel collection, right? If I figure out what that company code, or if I know that company code and know that access card number, and then I do some kind of intelligence gathering on that eBay seller, chances are I'm probably going to find out who he works for. Given enough time, I might figure that out. Now I know the facility code and possibly the range of access card numbers that I could then walk up to his facility, brute numbers either before the ones he's selling or after, or just brute a range. I already know the facility code and gain access to a building because someone sold some extra ones online. Pretty bad, you would think, right? I do. So then we found another issue. HID resells through partners, through channels. There's resellers out there that you can call up and say, hey, I've got this badge. I don't know what my facility code is. I don't know anything about it because our admin that used to run the badge system got fired. He doesn't work here anymore. Can you help me out? I need more cards. They'll take the series number off of your card, look it up in a database that interfaces back to HID, and they can tell you exactly what your facility code is based on the order string, which is on the card. So think of that from an attack perspective now. If one channel partner gets compromised and that access to that customer database gets compromised, now I can look up any serial number of an order or any order number and figure out and reverse what the facility code is and access card numbers for that particular company. So another Intel leak that I've never even had to touch anything on your company, never had to exploit anything. I've done all this through Intel gathering online to find out information about how to get into your facility before I even show up and touch one of your systems. Horrible, right? So that's this little curveball to throw in there of how the card numbers and access card numbers and facility codes all work together to authenticate, but how easy it is to gain that information without even compromising anything. So let's dig into how you can attack RFID systems and asset tags. I want to start out with the low frequency first because it's been a horse that's been beat for years. Everyone's talked about it. There's been new technology, new hardware that's come out, but it's still 70, 80%. Still unencrypted, horrible, can be cloned, can be modified. So a piece of hardware came out a few years ago. It's been a number of years now. And it's kind of the Swiss Army knife of RFID. So if you want to dive into RFID, this piece of hardware is called a Proxmark 3. So you can buy them legitimate from the vendor that makes them, or you can buy them from China for $100, $200 less. I think they list for $400, and China's got them for like $250 or $3. And then you buy the antennas for $40, $50. So for less than $400 or $500, you've got what you need to go break into 80% of the buildings out there. That's pretty bad. So there's a couple ways you can use it. There's a lot of different types of attacks you can do with it, not just the low frequency and high frequency stuff, but you can also do things like MyFare, which are your bus passes, your ski resort lift tickets, your meal cards. Actually, I think you guys have those here, don't you, Pat? Yep. So $400 gets you some free pizza. So think about it from that aspect, right? It's not just low frequency, high frequency. Pat's going to have to put in some monitoring now on the meal cards. But it essentially works, at a very high level. You've got your controller, and this runs a operating system and a firmware. And then you've got a USB connection to interface with it via a PC, whether it's Windows, Linux, whatever you want to use. And then you've got an antenna, and there's different types of antennas. There's low frequency, high frequency. You can make custom antennas to get longer read ranges. You can supply extra power to increase your range, things like that. So a lot of different stuff you can do with this Proxmark 3. So first I want to show you how easy it is to clone one of these unencrypted Proxcard 2s, which are 80% of the market again, right? So let's do that first. Here, hopefully you can see that, if I get my head out of the way. So there's a couple ways you can use the Proxmark 3. Cool, it's working. There's a wizard mode, kind of a standalone mode you can use, and I'll show you something cool with that in a minute. And then there's also the ability to watch the output, which is what I want to do here so you guys can see what we're doing. And to interface with it, low frequency, HID, demodulation, and I'll take a card. And so there's a couple methods out there to acquire badge information from someone. There's what the industry's kind of called now the butt tap method, which Dave is an expert at. And you can walk by and literally tap someone on the butt or wherever their badge is and read it that fast. And essentially it works like this. You put your reader into demodulation mode. As you can see, Dave and I are not friends at all. So I've got it in demodulation mode now. As fast as I present prox cards to it, it'll lie and not do anything. Come on now, there it goes. So as fast as I present cards, it'll read and decrypt the information on those cards. 35-bit card number, facility code. Every time it reads one of those, it prints the output, obviously, to standard out, but it also stores that in its memory buffer. So in a standalone mode, and I'll show you that next and how you can work it, you can set it into a standalone mode, set it in read mode, and the first card it interacts with, it writes to a memory buffer. It stores it there. Then you can then push the button, simulate it, and it replays what's in that mode. So if I get the right one, it works. That one works. So antenna wires jacked up. All right. So 44352 facility code 44 authenticates to this building. So now we do what's called simulation. And instead of doing demodulation, we do sim, and we just paste the tag information. And now it's simulating that tag. And lying to me again. Come on, man. So I gave this talk at DefCon, and I threw the Proxmark and 2 laptops because I had 5 demos. Looks like I'm about to throw something again. Come on, man. What the fuck? Demos. There it goes. So that easy. Butt tap, read the tag information, simulate, replay it, and people that use these in our industry usually bury the Proxmark inside of their jacket, run the cord down their sleeve, kind of have these in their hand, then walk up, badge into a building, they're inside, no one thinks anything different. The sad part about this attack, these types of attacks, is the beep is enough for someone to trust that what you just did was authorized. And you can even get by with some of the things that we do, and I'm sure Dave's team does as well, is just having a card that doesn't authenticate but makes the reader beep is usually enough to tailgate into a building. Because someone heard it beep behind them, they hold the door. They don't realize that that beep was bad. It's no different than a successful beep, it's just a beep. The reader may display a red or a green if that's turned on, but that's enough for someone to not check the guy behind them, and usually they hold the door for you and let you in. So we always have a couple cards in our pockets to just try and authenticate to tailgate into a building. But essentially that's how that attack works. You're within range of someone, you read their tag information, you then simulate it, or I can go one step further and write that information by doing a clone command, write that to a card, and now I have a physical card. And if that company is, enhanced and they put actual pictures on the badges, you can get printable badges. You can put a fake picture on that badge so it looks like you're an employee with someone else's copied information. And now you can walk up, badge in with a legitimate looking badge, and no one says anything. So pretty bad, right? How easy that is? Anyone can do it. Push a button, whatever. So the Proxmark becomes even more sexy when you conceal it because you can power it with just regular, power bank, USB, battery. Bury all this inside of just a regular plastic keyboard that transmits RFID, and now I'm walking around on campus with a keyboard, or a clipboard, and that transmits the RFID from the antenna inside of it, and I can walk up and tap the clipboard against the reader, and that transmits and lets me into the building as well. So now I've concealed that. It doesn't look obvious. I don't look like Joe Hacker walking around with, crazy-looking electronics hanging out of my, tactical jacket with 40 pockets on it. I'm walking up with a clipboard, and chances are if you got a clipboard, you mean business. No one's going to ask you questions because you look busy, right? So clipboards are one of the best tools a hacker uses when he's trying to get into a facility is, usually you walk around with a clipboard and a pen and you've got a collar shirt on, you're involved with something, no one's going to question you. You look like you're busy. So that's kind of just a quick little demo of how easy it is to, again, break into 80% of the buildings out there that use, low frequency. So it kind of puts into perspective of where RFID has come from when it relates to the low frequency Prox Card 2s. So someone decided that, guys from Foundstone, Brad Antowitz, I think is how you pronounce it, a couple years ago, he took the firmware of the Proxmark and customized it and wrote something called Proxbrute. So now think of this in a situation where I steal Pat's badge, whether I get it from him at Starbucks or I take a picture of it or I find it in the badge system, whatever method it was to get the facility code, the access card number, and the card type, and then I have his information. But Pat doesn't have access to the HR area or the executive floor or wherever I want to go that has elevator privileges, data center. So facility code for that building is still going to be the same, most likely. In most cases it is. But someone else's badge has access to that reader to get into that secured area of the facility. So all it is a different badge number, right? Still same facility code, still same card type, but someone else has a different badge number assigned to them, and they have extra rights through the badge system assigned to that prox card. So someone came up with a method to brute through a series of access card numbers. So using the Proxmark with custom firmware, I don't have that firmware on here, you can read someone's card, then it pulls the facility code, and it starts at a series of badge IDs that you give it, and it iterates through one by one, and you hold it up to the reader, and it presents one every half a second, whatever the interval is you set, until it finds one that opens the door. So literally you're rolling up, door opens. So pretty simple method because it's all unencrypted. The overhead for that transaction isn't very intensive, so it doesn't take a lot of computing power to brute force those credentials. So it can all be done just on small little processor that's in these things. So something that obviously became a big issue there was being able to elevate privileges just off one asset tag. Put it in perspective of a Windows environment. I have standard access user that has email and SharePoint, doesn't have access to everything else, but now I can brute force a bunch of usernames essentially until I find the right username to get into domain controllers, get into Linux environment, whatever it might be. So I've gone from standard user to super user just by brooding through a series of just one property, which is the access card number. Pretty bad, right? Because there's no encryption. So Proxbrute obviously became something big for our industry. But we decided that we want to take it kind of one step further and figure out how to do what I've always referred to as smart brute forcing. I've given talks in the past on that, and Dave's talked about it some too, is if I'm an attacker, I don't want to generate so much noise that you're going to find me. I want to be smart and intelligent about how I attempt my logins. If I'm brute forcing things on the outside, I'm not going to run a dictionary of 30,000 words, because chances are either one, you're going to see that, you're going to stop me with an IPS or something, or two, I'm going to lock an account. Now in bad systems, you can't really lock accounts, but I'm generating enough noise, enough traffic that you're going to see that at some point. So I don't necessarily want to walk up to a reader and Proxbrute it for 10 minutes and look like, it looks suspicious because I'm standing there with a hood over my head at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to badge in, waiting, maybe smoking a cigarette or something to conceal myself. But at some point, someone's going to catch me, maybe, if there's a camera on that door, whatever. So let's be more intelligent about how we try and authenticate and attempt multiple authentications. So this is where the red team blended threat stuff comes in, right? If I can learn information either about you as a target, or I can learn information from a badge system and extract that data, because I can look up and see, okay, Pat has access to first floor, but Scott has access to data center, and Scott's badge number is this. Now let's take the information I know from Dave, or Pat, or whoever my example was just now, and then shove that data in that I need that associates that card number, make my asset tag in electronic format, then simulate that. Now I've done one attempt, but I've used the information I've learned from OSINT, from attack on badge system, from whatever, or I just stole somebody's badge, and then I simulate that. So what I'm showing here is kind of how the binary stream appears, and then convert that to hexadecimal format, which is essentially what that tag ID is. So what I showed you before was we did a demodulation. The demodulation gave us the tag information after the hex string was decoded. And then what I did in the next example was broke it down one step further so you can see what that binary string looks like. So for this 35-bit card format, there's always parity on both sides of the string. There's always a preamble. But then based on what kind of card format it is, it's always going to follow the same format for that string. So if I know where my start and stop is for my facility code, as well as my access card number, which is what I'm showing in green and purple, then I just modify my access card number to match the target that I want to elevate privileges to now. I generate that through anything online, or you can write a script for it. We wrote a script for it. But this an example up here is I'm going from hex to decimal to binary. It takes half a second, right? Something's going to do it for you, a script, whatever you want to do. So I generate my string for my badge number that I want to become. I then shove that back into my stream. I then convert it back the other way to hexadecimal and then simulate that tag ID. All unencrypted again. I've taken a portion of a credential set, modified it, created the stream back that I need for the hex tag, presented that back to the reader. All again unencrypted, very easy to do. Make sense? So, we got pretty good on time. Essentially, the demo that I wanted to show there was what I just did, which we would just generate that with a script, whatever, paste that back into the simulation command. Same thing we did before. That would then badge in by changing badge number. Same thing I showed before, so in sake of time, I'll get on to the next stuff. So we've gone from butt tap method to clone and simulate and replay, and then also read or learn information from badge system, modify, and elevate privileges. So 2 solid attacks with prox cards that are 80% of the market again. So now I can, learn what I need within inches of someone. I can learn what I need from a badge system. I can learn it off of eBay by buying cards or looking up information about a company or whatever. I can, social engineer my way into, and something we do a lot when we're attacking facilities is maybe I come in and I interview for a job, or I get a tour of your building. Something that is going to give me a visitor badge. Chances are that visitor badge has the same facility code, but a limited access card number to just get me in first floor lobby, or get me to break room, or wherever they're going to allow me to go as a visitor. So I go to the bathroom for 2 seconds, clone that card, write the information, then go back home, create a bunch of cards, learn more information, take pictures of somebody's card, whatever, make that card that I want to make to match an actual employee that has access, come back in at a later date just with what I learned from a visitor badge that was given to me during a tour or an interview or whatever. So think of it in perspective that way. If I'm able to get one read off a badge, that can turn into elevated privileges pretty easily. So we wanted to extend our attack range. Instead of having to make it obvious and go up and tap somebody to get the asset information if they have it hanging on their waist or a lanyard or whatever, let's increase our distance for attack. So moving from standard reader on the side of a building that usually has a read range of, a couple centimeters, a couple inches maybe, if you're lucky, to what usually you find in parking garages, because they don't want you to get out of the car. They don't want you to bang your car against the, concrete piling that's there, or it might be raining and they want to save you from getting out of the vehicle, whatever it might be. And it just keeps things moving faster because you can hold your arm out the window. So now you have a larger reader, larger antenna. Usually power is a bit different, and that now extends the range to 2 to 3 feet. So think of that in an attack perspective. 2 to 3 feet is me walking up and asking somebody for a light for a cigarette, or asking them directions, or just having a conversation. Excuse me. So now I've gone from being suspicious attacker tapping someone to a person on the street having a conversation, and I've read what I need. And the way that we do that is we took a standard reader, stock off the shelf, buy one online for $300-400. And we didn't do it first. There's other researchers that did some of this. We took it a bit further later, I'll talk about. And we then took an Arduino. The Arduino sets on the other side of the reader where if it's encrypted, where the unencrypted data would occur, the Wiegand data, and it reads the Wiegand data, decodes it, and extracts out the information that I need. Facility code, access card number, and card type. And if it's encrypted or unencrypted, it tells me that as well. So somebody put some code out a few years ago. We used that code along with some other researchers have used it too, modified it a bit, and we now have a Arduino that sits inside of this reader. And what's cool about this reader is it can be deployed a number of ways. You can put it in your briefcase and walk around, and if you're European, your satchel, your man purse, whatever you want to call it. And you walk around with your MERS and walk through a crowd of people. And as I'm walking through a crowd of people, anyone that has an exposed RFID tag, I'm reading if I'm within that range. And it's writing it to an SD card. I then go back to my scary van in the parking lot. I look at all my information. I pull out which ones I want. I write my cards. I walk back into the building. And I've done all that just by walking through a crowd of people, and within 2 to 3 feet, provided I have enough power for that reader, I'm now siphoning data off of exposed RFID tags. So now, couple that with what we've just talked about with what I can do with a prox card, and I've gone from walking through a crowd of people to creating asset credentials that I need or I want to create, and then get access to the building, right? So that was all unencrypted, and the reason that it's so simple is because it's unencrypted. So here's where it gets fun. HID decided, all right, let's solve this unencrypted problem and create an encrypted asset tag. So everything from card, which looks like the same card unless you get up close on it and you look at the details, everything from card to reader is encrypted. So if someone's snooping that connection, it's encrypted. I can't just decode it like I did walking up, tapping a card. It's encrypted. From reader to controller is still unencrypted, still Wiegand. So we'll talk about attacks on that side of the fence later. But everything from asset tag to reader, encrypted. So encrypted means awesome, right? So we decided, let's take the same attack and let's modify the code a bit more. And now let's be able to do the same thing and get the information I need off these encrypted cards. Because what we'll talk about in a minute is we can also do some of these same attacks with the encrypted format. But now you're talking 10% of the market, whatever that statistic is, not the 70 to 80 that has the prox card 2s. So this is more of a specialized, focused attack on someone that has a higher level of security. Problem with that is the cost to replace all of your unencrypted readers and then provision new cards for all your employees and deal with that transition phase as you're rolling out those new cards is pretty impactful to a company for them to go in and just replace it all. So chances are usually those companies only do things like this when they move into a new building or they're building a facility or they move in somewhere that already has it. They don't go usually retrofit, new technology sometimes for these things because you're talking about pulling drywall, pulling cables. It's not as easy as just replacing the reader sometimes, replacing the controllers, and then giving everyone a new card. So the architectural changes and the cost obviously is more of an impact sometimes. So this is obviously a smaller market, but higher level security facilities are probably going to have these. So we did the same thing, same concept, used a large reader. This time it's a different model. It's a R90 instead of a Maxi Prox. And we took the R90, connected an Arduino to it, 2 wires, data 0, data 1 to read the Wiegand data, and then write it to an SD card again. Same thing, 2 to 3 feet. The read range is a little different on the iCLASS, it's about 2 feet. And I can then get that information I need to, same process, write those cards, do what I want to do. So this kind of just gives you a high level. We took it one step further, put an LCD on it. LCD prints out what it reads, so I don't have to take it back to the van and pull the SD information off of it. It prints it out on the LCD. There's just an example of it hooked up, wired up to an Arduino, and then printing out a facility code and access card number. And we did all this in Fritzing, so you can actually go print your own boards if you wanted to, and then it gives you exact locations of where you need to solder everything, or you can go one step further and print a board and connect the Arduino directly to the board. So a couple of ways you can go further with it. We've gone a bit further and started incorporating it into some of our readers. But concept is pretty simple, right? The Arduino sets on the unencrypted side, reads data 0, data 1 wires, decrypts that Wiegand information, prints out the data you need. And we have a GitHub link that we have for LARES Consulting. And on that GitHub link, we have our code for the Arduino. So here's where it gets fun. In 2010, a couple of researchers, Miloš did if that's how you pronounce his name, I probably tore it up there. He did a paper that's become kind of the Bible of RFID iCLASS hacking, is what's called the Heart of Darkness. The Heart of Darkness breaks down everything from start to finish on how the encrypted iCLASS cards work, from the crypto routines to the ciphers to the algorithms. Everything is in this paper. And what they discovered when they were doing their research is not this reader, but another reader called an RW300. The revision A readers that came out had the serial interface still enabled. They didn't disable the interface. Given enough research, someone finally figured out how to wire up and connect to the serial interface and dump the firmware. Inside the firmware were the encryption keys for iCLASS. So now you could go buy a revision A reader, pull the firmware, pull the encryption keys, and essentially become HID and do whatever I want to do with an iCLASS card because I can write iCLASS just like HID could. So use the data, write the card, same attacks we did with the prox card 2. So now iCLASS essentially became a prox card 2, an unencrypted card, if you will, because the key was stolen, right? So how did HID fix it? You would think the obvious thing would be change the keys. Your password gets compromised, your key gets compromised, whatever it is, change the damn key, right? No. Their fix was put out new readers and disable the serial interface so it can't happen again. Worst mitigation ever. Today, they still use the same encryption key. So 5 years later, same key. So that key obviously isn't on pastebin, but you go out and you get a reader off of eBay for $300, follow the process that's outlined online, you too can dump the firmware and get the key. So that obviously did, a tidal wave of things. Cloning became possible, which is essentially what we did with the Prox card too. The Proxmark, as of last week, just had some functionality added to the firmware where I can do the same things with iCLASS. I can clone, I can simulate, I can replay, I can make my own, information, generate my own tags, all those types of things, all because I have that. Theoretically, if I had it, have the master key to do those things. But if you don't want to go that route, you can always just call up your friends in China, and you can buy a stock OmniKey reader, 5321 is the model, and you call China, this XFPGA site, which has been around for a long time. They're the ones that also sell the knockoffs Proxmar 3, so $100 less you can buy from there. And you buy their iCLASS cloner. What their iCLASS cloner really is a key, the authentication key, the master key, the decryption key, on a USB drive and a custom driver. And I don't like the custom driver from China thing, so that's why I have another laptop here that's got XP on it that never gets connected to a network. So hence the extra laptop. But essentially, they've written a custom driver to interface with this and act as HID and give you the ability to do the same thing we did with the Prox 2, take an iCLASS card if I can get my hands on one, and binary dump the information stored in the memory blocks. And I'll do a quick demo on that so you guys can see how that works. So how easy is it to clone encrypted iCLASS cards? How easy is it? Making sense so far? You guys digging it? Cool. Yeah, I was talking to Pat and Josh and asked if you guys have any kind of RFID classes, and they said no, so I figured this obviously would be some, over your head if you hadn't dug into the research of it, but at a high level, it's pretty simple to understand, right? The unencrypted stuff is wicked easy to understand because it's all unencrypted, and it's just a authentication routine that a card is presenting to a reader. So if I can intercept that data, it's no different than sniffing the wire, of a network. If I can sniff and get a username and password, you don't have to be a genius to present that somewhere. You just figure out what that username and password is and how to present it to whatever you're trying to log into. In this case, it's a reader, not a website. So that's not looking good. Come on now. Really? Maybe I won't be showing this. This isn't the one that I threw at DefCon, so it should work. What the hell? Demo gods. You getting any input at all over there? Random guy behind the curtain. Yeah, nothing. Usually it'll rescale. For some reason my hotkeys not popping up. I was trying to force it. I don't care. I'll do either one. It's just not see if it lets me extend. I don't think it's working at all. Weird. It might be the laptop. Wait, I think this did it. Or not. All right, I may not show this if it's not going to get there. back to that if it doesn't work. I'll show you on here. Well, I can't. Questions while we wait? It's a good time to maybe ask something to get called up. Any questions so far? We've got a few minutes to show this last part. Good. Yeah, so there's a couple ways that it's actually a good time to kind of go there and then come back to this to show it. Let's just talk about RFID mitigation and talk about this, right? Easy way to protect RFID is the 79-cent sleeves, right? You've seen them for your wallets and things, for passports and driver's licenses that have the tags in them now. A lot of ways to, from a cheat perspective, don't worry about it, it's fine. From a cheat perspective, you can protect the data that's leaking off the card, if you will. But really, the right way to protect these types of attacks is protect the badge system itself more than anything, right? If I learn your password, I shouldn't be able to compromise your entire organization. And that's essentially what's happening here. If I learn one piece of data off these badges, chances are I can elevate privileges to super user and then get to where I need to go, right? So this is standard security iCLASS when you talk about the iCLASS piece. The prox cards, there's not really much you can do except limit what could happen if an attack were to occur. You can put two-factor on some of those things. The two-factor stuff actually I'll talk about now versus showing in a demo. So let's just say the heck with this. The demo for the iCLASS that I wanted to show that I'm not putting on this laptop because it's China. The demo essentially dumps the card information and lists out the block data that's stored on the card. I think I broke the projector. Now this one ain't working. Did I break it? No more talks today. Conference is over. Now I broke my laptop too. What the hell? This one was working fine. What happened to the projector? Oh God. I guess. Let's do duplicate. That should be getting the signal. All right, so we'll go back to yours real quick while we're waiting. Standard security, stolen key. Yeah. The next step up for what HI did was what they called elite security, where you could assign a custom key for your facility. So custom encryption key instead of the leak key that came off of the reader. So I think that's where you're going with it, right? Can you set a custom key? There's some discoveries in that realm now with elite security, high security. And the reader itself and the technology used for the authentication process uses a weak encryption, which is similar to DES. So if anybody knows the difference between DES and triple DES, DES obviously can be bruited pretty easily. The attack that can occur on a custom security key applied, which is high security, elite security, is you can use the Proxmark now with a new code and present a number of authentication attempts against that reader, capture enough data, go back and brute force that encryption key. And then use that key versus the stolen key and do the same thing again with iCLASS, right? So what I wanted to show was what it looks like when, where is it at? All right, here. All right, so when you dump a iCLASS card, you have a number of blocks that you are concerned with. Block 0 is the serial number. Hardly any badge systems out there use the serial number to authenticate with. So you can forge that as long as it's in the supported range of what an iCLASS serial number is supposed to be. Block 1 and 2 are data about the card itself. Block 6 is usually card type. Block 7 is where the facility code and the access card number is stored. Block 8 and 9 is typically where two-factor data elements are stored. Bio, PIN, things like that. So here's the stink about PIN and bio. I alluded to it earlier. If in some situations, if you have two-factor in place, your second factor of authentication is stored on the card. I'll say that again. So the PIN and the bio is stored on the card. So when I walk up and present my tag to the reader goes, card number is allowed to authenticate, facility code is allowed to authenticate, what is your PIN? Or what is your fingerprint? You then enter that data, it validates that against what's on your card. Client-side validation. So all I have to do is copy Dave's card. I don't care what his fingerprint is. I make an electronic signature of my fingerprint, whatever my block 8 and block 9 would look like, or my PIN number, and put that into block 8 and block 9. And now when I authenticate to that reader, I know what my PIN is because I set it in block 8 and block 9. So two-factor is, is debunked at that point. It doesn't exist. Client-side validation, everyone knows that does web apps and things like that, is client-side validation is the worst you could have, right? There's nothing being done on the server side to have any type of integrity about that information. It's all forged. So you can overwrite that information. So what I wanted to show was how easy it is just with the Omni key to dump all those blocks, take a blank card, write those blocks back to the blank card, and now I've done a clone of an iCLASS card because I had that master encryption key that was stolen back in 2010. You can then elevate privileges, go one step further, and generate the information you need for block 7, which is your facility code and access card number, and write that data. So now I've gone from standard security, or standard user, to elevated user because I modified my block 7 information, which is my access card number, facility code, for the elevated user that I wanted to mimic. So again, the iCLASS offers encryption, so someone can't snoop the connection, but what good is encryption if the key's been compromised? And that's really what all this boils down to. So leave a minute or two for questions. There's a couple of other things that you can do against a badge system that I'll go through quickly. One is what's called the Gecko attack. The Gecko attack is essentially snapping into data 0, data 1 wires on the back side of the reader where it's unencrypted and intercept that Wiegand data as a badge authenticates. Now I have the information I need to go make the badge because now I've siphoned off the data that I need for facility code, access card number, and card type. So there's attacks if you can physically get to the controller or physically get to the wiring behind the reader, which essentially is pulling the reader off the wall, snapping into data 0, data 1, and sniffing the data on those wires, and it's what's called a Gecko attack. So do some research on that if you guys are interested in learning more about that one. There's also the blended threats that we talked about before, right? If I can gain access to a badge system itself, the badge software that runs the system, I can extract the information off that system and start doing what I need to do there from an attack perspective. The mitigation piece really is the last part I want to talk about. We're doing some other stuff too that I could talk about after we're done. We're kind of running out of time. But there's some stuff that we're starting to build now that will basically simulate kind of a mesh network of all the red team members. So maybe I have someone in the parking lot that's running the equipment and doing the card builds and taking the data that someone's feeding them out from an operational person in the field and using a mesh network to feed all that data back and forth. Whether it's a microcontroller that's buried in a micro PC with a Zigbee connection or a 3G or 4G connection, someone's out in the field siphoning cards, getting the data they need, pumping it back to the guy in the van. The guy in the van's making cards. The guy in the van's simulating tags, generating those things, sending it back to the reader in the field. The reader in the field is then walking up and badging in. So creating a collaboration of team members to expedite access into a building, essentially. Instead of one person taking the chance of getting burned, put 3 or 4 people on it. Each person has a different role within that attack and feed all that data back centrally to a place that we need. Also being able to backdoor a reader itself. So what if I could backdoor a reader, and this has been done already, what if I could backdoor a reader and every time someone authenticates, I log that data to something. I come back later, 24 hours later, I take it out of the reader, go back home, and now I've got the data I need. So instead of taking the chances of, am I going to get a good read if I walk through a crowd of people, just get the read off the badge when it badges into the reader. Backdoor it, siphon the data to an SD card or however I want to store it, or exfiltrate it over 3G or Zigbee or maybe the wireless that's on that campus. And now I've gained the information I need just by backdooring a reader. Mitigation, there's really not a lot to go back to your mitigation question again, right? There's really not a lot you can do to protect the tag other than the cheap RFID sleeves. They do work. They're decent. Some have been, proven to not work as well. But really what you want to do is implement a system that has the right two-factor technology, not something that's written to the card. There are systems out there that do server-side validation. Air gap the badge system. I shouldn't be able to compromise your Active Directory environment and then RDP to your badge system. Happens a lot. We see it a lot. Some companies now are getting smart and they're air gapping that just like they would their RSA server, their secure ID server or something. Air gap that thing off the network so that I can't pivot from compromising a user workstation to getting domain admin to getting badge system. Because if I get the badge system, chances are I can then get your facility code, get your access card numbers, find out who's in the building at that time, find out what access level they have, can they get data center? Or even better, what we like to do is compromise the badge system and then remotely open the doors. So I'm in the badge system remotely, Dave's on site, I say, go try data center door, open, Dave walks into the data center. So the blended threat stuff is really where the beauty is for some of these things. And then the last thing is something that we haven't seen as an industry yet, and that's implementing some kind of IPS technology around badge systems. It doesn't exist today. All badge systems have their own logging, for good or bad, whatever they are. No one's really centralizing those logs like they do other systems in the environments. But there's really no IPS system that would detect if someone walks up and does Proxbrute and tries 50 immediate authentication tips on a reader. That just doesn't exist. The chances are the only way someone's going to get caught if they do a Proxbrute or an iCLASS brute or a smart brute is if they are physically seen on camera or someone observes them standing there for a minute trying to get into this reader. So there's just not a lot of coverage around some type of technology to layer in front of a badge system. So similar to what an IPS would be. And then obviously training. Training is the big one. Training your guards, training your staff, training them for what to look out for. Look for that crazy guy with the hood on at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to badge in. Just a quick little slide that I do want to give shout outs. There's a number of people that have given a lot of stuff, a lot of research that are way smarter than I am about this stuff. Essentially, I've been able to put a lot of this stuff together and talk about how it impacts a company, but also be able to put it into a 1-hour talk versus you guys going and researching for a year. So a lot of people there that I definitely want to give thanks to. And then that's it.